We're talking today with Joel Winters of Grand Rapids, Michigan. Joel goes by Tom, so that's what I'll call you. So Tom, go ahead and start off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
Birth date, August 31st, 1941, Denison, Ohio. That puts me in the Woody Hayes era, and I'm still a Go Buck guy, although I've been here since 1968.
Okay. What was your family doing for a living when you were a kid?
My father was a small town Baptist preacher, had a good upbringing, lived in small towns, lived in small houses, attended small churches.
Mm-hmm.
The motto in the home was love God, love your family, love your country. So we did. By the time we got out of high school, I had an older brother, a twin brother, younger sister, and by the time my twin brother and I graduated from high school, we had moved 7 times.
Okay. So where did you graduate from high school?
Coshocton, Ohio.
Okay. All right. And then what year did you finish high school?
1960.
Okay. And what did you do after high school?
Went to college. Was never a very good student, but always had a good job through high school. And went to Huntington College. For a year and a half, Huntington College is outside of Fort Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
And due to grades, I left school with another guy, and we traveled around the United States, mainly in the South and Midwest, did odd jobs, sightseeing, and that type of experience. And then returned to Huntington 1 year later and met a smart woman that then did my college work.
Mm-hmm.
I was one of the early people that took 5.5 years to get through college. But I had a variety of jobs. I worked in the last 3.5 years, worked in a mortuary. And that was before EMS.
Mm-hmm.
So you did the ambulance work, the first call work, the body prep work.
Okay.
And all that was required back then was Senior Red Cross.
Mm-hmm.
And today's EMS is a paramedic. You know, they're superb.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you have to kind of adjust to doing that kind of work or get used to it? I mean, if you're seeing bodies and things like that, or did it just kind of come easily to you?
The pay was good.
Mm-hmm.
Lived over top the mortuary, so I cut your school bill in half.
Mm-hmm.
And it did come easy. It was a good education, good training with people, and handling difficult situations. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay. All right. And so, and you basically, having had the time off and all this, is you were a better student when you got back because you had some.
No.
Oh. Or you just had your future wife
my
making
new
you do your work?
girlfriend did my term papers.
Oh.
I didn't even buy books. I hate to tell you that, doctor, but
okay.
I'd follow her as many classes as I could. She graduated in 3.5 years,
Mm-hmm.
and she gave me 2 pages of notes on what the test should cover, and that and honorary reading courses in the summer is what got me through. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, so you muddled through. So when do you graduate from college?
In '65.
Okay.
Went to work for Hoover Bearing outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing I liked about it, it was Hoover Bearing was a large company, pretty progressive, and they were involved in a Navy quiet program, bearings for silent submarines.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd asked me about my military requirement, and I thought Coshocton, Ohio had forgotten me, and I assured him no problem, not to worry. There 3 months, got a draft notice.
All right. But so even though you took longer than the usual 4 years, which is normally how long a deferment would be for, now, did you continue to have a deferment, or did you just not apply and you just took your chances?
No, I had kept it active while I was in college,
Okay.
but then, I didn't. And,
So they found you.
so I go to Columbus, report to the draft. A recruiter catches me, and so I enlisted regular Army. Glad I did.
Okay. So what tactics did the recruiter use, or what did the recruiter say to you that got you to enlist for a full hitch rather than just be drafted for 2 years?
He said the draftees were going to Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
and if you enlisted, it'd be duty in Europe. My wife was a teacher, or would be a teacher by then, and she'd have a job on a military base, and it'd really be a great experience seeing all of Europe.
Mm-hmm. Now, was he, because you were enlisting for a longer period, did you have any opportunity to choose what kind of training you got? Or was that part of the package or not?
No.
Okay.
Plus, I wasn't experienced enough to know what to ask for.
Mm-hmm. What did you study in college?
History.
Okay.
English minor, history major.
Okay. And did you have any idea what you were going to do with that, or?
At one time, I had anticipated teaching. But the thought was getting out of school, get a job.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
Okay. All right. So you go in, you don't really know where you're going to wind up or what's going to happen, but he's suggesting to you that if you're in longer, you might get duty in Germany. Okay. So now you're in, and do you head off to basic training right away, or do you go home first, or?
I think there's 3 weeks. I had a report date,
Okay.
and they said Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and I thought, great, going south. Had never flown on a plane. Report in at 0700. I don't recall what, it was a weekday.
Mm-hmm.
And we sit all day waiting, and nothing's happening. And at 7 o'clock at night, we load on a bus and go to Fort Knox,
Oh.
and get in there at 2 o'clock. And the morning to be greeted by a bunch of drill sergeants who told us how worthless we were and wanted an insult to the Army. And
All right. Now, did you do a physical in Columbus?
Yes.
Was that part of that? Okay. How rigorous a physical was it?
not very. I mean, they had quotas to meet, and you had a heartbeat, and
Okay.
they took you.
All right. And so when was it that you actually start basic training? In terms of what time of year, what year?
That would have been December 5th, reported in, and got to Fort Knox on the 6th, December 65. So
Okay. All right. Late 65. Okay. So you get there, you meet the drill sergeants, and now once you're there at basic training, what happens?
Well, they had told us to bring minimal stuff because it would be shipped home once we were given equipment. So we stand out in the cold. We get about 2 hours sleep that first night, stand on the mountaintop, just cold as could be, go in for breakfast, and then the activities start, the testing, the shots, and all that type of thing. 3 days of orientation, and they profile you, and then basic, I actually enjoyed. I liked the training, and most of the people could handle it pretty well. You know, they're 18, 19-year-old. I was 23, and So I'm trying to think.
What,
Uh,
did you get treated at all differently because you were older, or was it easier or harder for you because you were older?
I did. I was made an acting jack, where you wear a sleeve patch with a sergeant rank, and only because I'd been to college.
Mm-hmm.
And so you did all the paperwork for the barracks, and you did the scheduling for the security posting and the fire watch,
Mm-hmm.
and that type of thing. Went very fast,
Okay.
and
How much of an emphasis was there on discipline?
a lot.
Okay, and how did they teach that or enforce it?
They could be pretty physical on that. I mean, you could get racked on the helmet pretty easily, or kicked in the pants, and I wonder if they still do that. I don't know, but
They're not supposed to hit people.
yeah. Well, they didn't baby you, and the
Mhm.
forced marches were reasonable.
Okay.
And by that time, people were starting to take Vietnam more serious, and so they had an anticipation that they may be there.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't know what your slot was until like the last 3 days. Frankly, I was quite surprised for MP,
Mm-hmm.
not displeased at all. And so then Augusta, Georgia for AIT.
Okay, that's advanced individual training.
Yeah. And by then I was into it. I liked the tradition, I liked camaraderie.
So adjusting to Army life wasn't very hard for you.
No,
Okay.
because I grew up in a very disciplined home, and I even didn't mind the food. So first, I missed my rotation in the last week of hand-to-hand training. Broke my ankle in 3 places.
Oh.
And so I was in a Section 8 unit, disabled unit or
Mhm.
not fit unit.
Yeah.
Well, I recovered, and so I was really pleased with the assignment. I went to Fort Devens, close to Concord and Lexington,
Okay. All
just
right.
outside
So
of
just
Boston.
let's to back up a little bit. So breaking the ankle, that was at AIT,
Yeah.
not at basic. Okay. Well, what did the military police training consist of? What were you doing at Fort Gordon?
Well, there was a lot of legal training, rules and regulations, Uniform Code of Justice, pistol range, rifle range. The hand-to-hand was, the instructor was using me as to demonstrate,
Mm-hmm.
and actually flipped me too high, and I landed wrong. And but that was not uncommon in there. I mean, each cycle had injuries.
Okay. So there were other guys in that
Yeah.
unit with you who had broken or twisted one thing
Yeah.
or another and
Yeah.
were waiting to go. Yeah. Now, so Fort Gordon's down in Georgia. Did you go off base at all while you were at Fort Gordon?
Not very often.
Okay.
You could get some week time passes, but I don't recall going off more than twice,
Mm-hmm.
and that was to go to a restaurant or something.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're in a society that still it had been segregated and there were still racial divisions and things
Yeah.
there. Did you observe any of that, or did you not really see it from your perspective?
No, I don't think. Once you even in basic training, once you're in a unit, there's some pride to it.
Yeah. Well, that's within the military. I meant if
Yeah.
you go off base.
Oh, off base, I wasn't off enough to recognize
Okay.
anything.
Okay. But within it, basically, the Army had been integrated for 20 years at that
Yeah.
point. And so that,
And saw no problems.
okay. All right. So when do you actually go up to Fort Devens then? When do you start there?
It was July, and I had to go home to get married, and so on a 3-day pass, go home, get married in Sunfield, Michigan, come back to Fort Devens. My wife gets a job before we have a place to live at a middle school, with the only commitment that she had to finish the school year. If I was shipped out, she had to finish.
Right.
And we loved the New England area. Loved Fort Devens was an old post, a World War II type.
Where is that relative to the city of Boston?
About 22 miles northeast.
Okay.
And post size about 25,000.
Mm-hmm.
And a big NSA outfit there. And so I started out, usual MP routine, patrol and traffic and raising the flags, that type of thing. And then I was called in, and they had an open slot that a captain had been filled and pulled out and shipped over, and covering court cases for the First Army.
Okay. And so what does that mean, covering court cases?
Well, any violation of the Uniform Code of Justice where civilian law was involved, we'd go in, have the right to interject, and the military always had the last say. And so it was easier in most instances, unless it was really a serious crime, for the civilian court to defer to the military, and so then we'd take the person as a prisoner back to Fort Devens. And so then they'd be charged Article 15 or whatever, depending on the crime. But always, I mean, an embarrassment to the U.S. military was worthy of an Article 15. So,
okay. So very quick, you get assigned to this. Now, do you get any kind of training for that job, or they just say, "Here, go do it now"?
I had a sergeant first class said, "This is the paperwork. This is how we want it done," and it was common sense, really. And you'd go in uniform, Class A, and you're wearing a weapon, and so they respected that. In spite of that being the 60s and all the protests against Vietnam and the social upheaval of the 60s.
Now, okay, and then how long were you doing that job?
9 months.
Okay, all right. And what kinds of cases or things came up, or what do you think about those going out to those different assignments? Are there ones that kind of stand out for you?
Yeah, there were times where the local police would call and say, "We've spotted this AWOL person." After 30 days, they're a deserter. And so that's where we get involved, because the FBI would put out paperwork on it. And one time we had to fight the dad to get the son. Another time, this poor mother let us into the house to search, and we found the guy not behind the furnace, actually where a furnace filter would bend. He had squeezed in there, And I think back at this point, I don't even remember how we decided that was a worthy look, except we were in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Boston in the 12th Federal Court when the Boston Strangler was brought in. Didn't see him, but I mean, there was a lot of excitement going around. The best part that I liked, so I'd see all these historic sites and places of note. So on Saturday, my wife and I would get in the car and go revisit. We really enjoyed the New England states.
Okay. Now, what rank were you at this point?
They moved me up pretty fast. I went up to sergeant.
Okay. So they realized they didn't really want a private going around doing these things.
That's right.
Okay. And did you, so if you got a call to go to a courtroom or go try to find somebody, would you take other MPs with you, or how did that work?
It depends. Half the time I'd take someone. But we had MP cars that had dividers in the back and with a big heat tube going under the seat. So if the prisoner misbehaved, we'd pull the tube off and let that back seat chill a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
They'd modify their attitude.
Okay. Well, I guess that works in the winter.
Yeah.
I don't know about the summer, but okay. And while you're there, so you're there kind of 65 into 66. Are you also following the news about Vietnam and the rest of the world?
That was the big talk because the AmeriCal unit was there and was shipped out and had a tough time of it because they were in the Central Highlands, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they took a real beating.
Yeah. So the unit that had been basically sort of the local, they would have been a National Guard unit, or
No.
That was a regular Army formation. Yep. Okay. But it was permanent. Its permanent base at that point was Fort Devens, and then they were shipped out. Yeah. Okay. So that had been going on. And so, did you think that at some point you might wind up going there, or were you still hoping you would just stay in Massachusetts? Or how did you wind up going to Vietnam?
Actually, we were newly married, happy, having a good time. Had enough money to have a minimal social life. So I came down on levy for Vietnam as opposed to direct orders.
Explain what levy is.
Well, it's an order coming to the post saying they need 50 people of this MOS or 100 of this MOS. So the provost marshal calls me in. He's a full bird colonel, and says that he could get me out of going to Vietnam, and I could spend my 3 years at Fort Devens. And it didn't take me but a minute to think about it. It was a Hemingway moment for me. I wanted to see if I were up to it, up to the challenge. Plus, I didn't want it on my conscience that someone else had gone in my place. So I'm given a ship out date. So make arrangements for my wife to come back to Sunfield, Michigan, where her parents would look after her. And I go out to Oakland Army Base, and these huge barracks where they'd have a couple thousand bunks, 6 bunks high. And my most memorable thing from that experience was the malaria medicine exposure to it. And some people had severe reaction to it, and I was one of them. So all the way to Vietnam, kind of a hallucinatory experience, and then when you land in Vietnam, you hear all types of stories prior to going. And in the office I worked out of, there were a couple veterans that had been there. Supposed to land at Bien Hoa, and they were under mortar attack, so we were diverted to Tan Son Nhut.
And that's the airport outside of Saigon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huge, civilian and military, but controlled by the military. And so the captain comes on, and we're flying 707s back then, reconfigured for troop transport. So the captain comes on and says, secure your seat belts, we're taking a steep descent. And 10 seconds later, it's like a roller coaster and you're heading down. And so it was to avoid ground fire. So we get in, we land, and one of the sensory sensations, you always remember, they opened the doors and you stepped out and you felt that heat and humidity. And I mean, it just took your breath away. Then you look at these gun jeeps, and the drivers and the gunners are wearing goggles, and I mean, looking like fierce warriors. And we're in Class A's, summer khakis. So we start this night convoy going up to Bien Hoa, which is about an hour and a half, a little less maybe. Sunrise is starting to come up, and so for the first time you're seeing the Vietnamese people in their black pajamas and strange looking black hats. And the one thing you pick up on right away is how small they are. An adult male would be like a 13 or 14-year-old in size. So that was welcome to Vietnam. It takes you about 3 weeks to learn that this is not a nice war, and, and your real assignment is to cover your buddy's back and get home safe.
Okay. Now, when you were making that trip from Tan Son Nhut over to Bien Hoa, were you in buses, trucks? What were they put, or were you just riding in a Jeep with somebody?
No, buses.
All right. And then when you get to Bien Hoa, what kind of assignment do you have? Are you just a regular MP at that point now, or what are you doing?
You're. They give you some different equipment, your weaponry, and then I was assigned to my unit, which was the 716th MP Battalion, Charlie Company, 1st Platoon. And so you're transported down through Saigon, and they always have TRAC or APC, Armored Personnel Carrier, to Tent City B. And your really first assignment is to start sandbagging the hut that you're in.
Okay. So the base you're at is actually called Tent City B.
Yeah.
Okay. Is this outside of Saigon
Yeah.
itself? Yeah. Okay. All right. And what went on at Tent City B, or who was there?
It was a big supply center. It had a big, large security force that did convoy escorts to the 9th Army, south in the...
Yeah, 9th Division, probably.
Yeah, 9th Division. To the south, the Mekong Delta. And then there were units that did security on the pipelines, fuel lines for Tonsinoot, which was always a hot target.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a group that did perimeter security for MACV, Military Assistant Command for Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of time, my unit did patrols with the 25th Arvins,
Mm-hmm.
and on small villages surrounding the area where there was always reports that the VC were gathering and
Mm-hmm.
that type of activity. So,
Okay. And what, I guess you said it took about 3 weeks for you to realize that this was an ugly war. I mean, what did you see or observe that kind of had you form that opinion?
the first one was the rules of engagement. And the Vietnamese are very attractive people, and yet they could be your supporter during the daylight hours, and they were coming across the fences at night. And in the early days, especially in a more populated area, where the society moves on scooters and motorcycles, and a family of 5 can fit on this small, but they could come by and throw a grenade in a Jeep and be gone in seconds. And the IDs back then weren't sophisticated like they are now,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, they still brought injury. And so any patrol always had to be on guard for that, but you weren't allowed to warn them off with a firing shot. They could be beside you.
Mm-hmm.
And my opinion, we could have won Vietnam in 3 to 6 months. We didn't have the public support, the public will. We were afraid of the indignation of the world. And so basically, I was like everybody else. I was a pretty good complainer.
Mm-hmm.
But I look back now, I was glad I served in the Army, and glad to be in Vietnam, actually.
Okay. All right. Talk a little bit about just the physical environment you lived in. What was your area and the base like, and what was sort of day-to-day life like?
The base was fine. You had maids to clean the hut. I mean, they're so inexpensive. Do your ironing, and in my unit, I made sure, because you went into a village representing an American force. We had very fancy helmet liners, polished up, and we could close down, as military police, we could close down a village if we wanted to, or if we thought we had just cause.
Close out a village, what does that mean?
Like martial law,
Okay.
quarantine them.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime G2 said, oh, there's activity, by the time you got there, there's no activity. Or they're pretty tribal. And when you were at the Arvins, they always knew someone in the village. You could tell by their body language,
Mm-hmm.
basically, what was going on. So
Now, what impression did you have of the Arvin soldiers?
we were with them to push them.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't reliable. So, and that's, I think the big infantry divisions had the same opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there were a couple special Arvin units, the Tiger Marines,
Mm-hmm.
which were fearsome. and well respected. The Australian forces there were very good. The Korean, South Korean White Horse Division was brutal. I mean, the Viet Cong, the NVA would stay away from. I mean, they would change paths just to avoid them.
Okay. Did you have any contacts with either the Australians or the Koreans?
Yeah.
Okay. Under what circumstance, or what do you remember about that?
Well, there's a Korean base close to us. The Australians, they had sent some MPs that patrolled with us. It's not always the same unit, but they're there for experience, and but they were good troops.
Okay. Now, as you're going, did you do, for your job, were you escorting convoys, or were you mostly just doing kind
Not
of
my
area,
unit.
kind of security area stuff in the
Yeah,
villages?
mostly security for MACV, and then with the Arvins, villages, maybe a 20-mile radius around the Cholon area.
Okay. And would you go with the Arvins into Cholon or neighborhoods in Saigon?
Not in Saigon, no.
Okay.
In
No, so
Cholon, some.
Okay. But Cholon is sort of, I mean, these days, Cholon is a neighborhood of Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City, as they
Yeah.
call it. But was it really kind of a separate area at that time?
It was. It was Chinese instead of Vietnamese.
Okay. And did you view that as a more dangerous place than most?
No.
Or?
I never thought so.
Okay. Now, did you have, did you actually get into any sort of combat situations, or people shooting at you, or things like that?
We did. It wasn't like the infantry. It was more sniper fire, hit and run, sapper teams, which they're very famous for. And a sapper team is about a 9-man unit that hits in a flash and is gone. So.
Now, would those attack the base, or would they attack you when you're out in
while
the field?
you're on patrol, or so.
Okay. And so sappers, I mean, it's a term that usually refers to what amount to kind of low-grade engineers. What were the sappers doing, or what kind of weapons did they have?
Well, they had RPGs and AK-47s and explosives.
Okay. And what was their purpose or their function?
Disruption.
Okay.
Yeah. Fear, and if the Vietnamese knew they'd face reprisal if they showed loyalty, and
Okay. Now, the Tent City B itself, did that ever come under attack or harassing fire?
yeah, mainly the NVA. They had what they called the Chinese 222s, and their rockets, you could hear them coming, which was the big psychological thing. They weren't very accurate, but that's why we had pretty good bunkers, to protect for that.
And how common was it to get rocketed or sniped at or whatever?
After the Tet Offensive, it was pretty heavy for a while. But prior to that, the NVA were good troops. I mean, they were regular operated military formation, where the Viet Cong, might be the barber on base during the day, and at night he was trying to blow up one of your installations. So there's a lot of amateur involved, but
Okay. All right. So you were in Vietnam at the end of January '68 when the Tet Offensive started. So what do you remember about that point in time?
Well, 2 days or 3 days before, you sense that there's something coming. And we trained heavily as 25-man reaction teams.
Mm-hmm.
And you're supposed to be in gear and off the post in 7 minutes. We prided ourselves that we would do it in 5 minutes or under. And so on the night of the Tet Offensive, when it started, everybody, most units had a general knowledge of what area they would be involved with. About 2 o'clock in the morning, it goes to red, and so I was part of a 2-man, 25-man reaction team, and the first team goes out to BOQ3, and I honestly thought that BOQ3 is staff officers, generals.
Okay, so
Well,
bachelor's
for-
living quarters then. So
Yeah,
it's- So this is off of a base, and it's an
Yeah.
area where a lot of these guys live. Okay.
and the lieutenant, first lieutenant, wanted to lead that one, and I thought that some officers just got nervous because of their ranks called in. For heaven's sakes, there's a big ARVN post directly across from this.
Mm-hmm.
It was an old rubber plantation mansion that they had. And within minutes, like 10 minutes, the radios came back that this team had been ambushed. And so second team I was on went out, and either wrong time or wrong place, without getting into the mapping system of what they went. The driver on the deuce and a half, which had a 50 caliber on turret on top, took down an alley, which was a shortcut.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of coming in on the main street to the front of it. And so they got ambushed, hit hard, and I don't think whether they ever really knew whether that team was to hit the front gate of the ARVN post. I mean, it was like a 3,000-man post right across from them.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just an opportunity that came through. So that was a tough night. Lost a lot of people. And
Were you able to get to where the ambush site was?
yeah,
Okay.
and had to get Hueys in and some light tanks to clear it out because you didn't know where they were. I mean, so
Do you think that that first reaction group did that disrupt maybe a possible attack on the ARVN base just by showing up in the wrong place? Or
it's a possibility. They had no way of knowing that we were bringing a reaction unit through there.
mm-hmm.
So
Okay. Now, what happened to the bachelor's quarters itself? Did that get attacked, or were they all right?
No,
Okay.
no. And it was a walled-in facility.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay. So you basically had units that had sort of preset assignments. If something X happens, they're going to go here, and if this unit goes here, this one goes there. And so that just all sort of played out that night. Now, how long, I mean, did the area stay more dangerous for a while after
Oh,
the
yeah.
start of Tet?
The night of Tet Offensive, my unit was on duty for almost 52 hours.
Okay.
But that was such a devastating blow to the American efforts in Vietnam, from Da Nang up north all the way. It didn't hit the Delta very much, but you know, down to Saigon. I mean, the embassy was attacked, and
Right. Now, did you ever wind up in firefights with North Vietnamese or Viet Cong, or was your contact always the kind of IED or stray sniper thing?
yeah,
So did you have combat or just the snipers?
mostly snipers. We had fire action, one with the Arvins, but you know, it wasn't extensive like infantry. You know,
Yeah.
the engagements were short, and the Viet Cong would just kind of disappear, float away.
Okay. Now, did things eventually quiet down?
It took about 4 months.
Because there was activity in Cholon in May of '68, if I remember right. There's sort of a second Tet Offensive, and regular units. I think the 9th Division has to go in and fight in some of those neighborhoods.
The 1st Division, the Big Red One, came in after Tet. So,
all right. Now, back, I mean, talk again on the base itself. I don't know what kind of facilities did you have? I mean, you said you're living in tents, or were you on tents that had hard sides on them, or?
they're metal sides, screened about 5 foot up, and then you'd sandbag to waist height or so. So, and it wasn't a bad facility. There were no real permanent buildings. I was trying to think. Headquarters was a 2-story, but it was better than a lot. I can tell you that. And the showers during the monsoon, you collected rainwater. I went over there thinking that the monsoon meant heavy torrential rains day after day after day, and then dry season, no rain. It's not the case. I mean, you can have a beautiful day in the monsoons, and in literally 1 or 2 minutes, the sky is dark, and it's just torrential for 15 minutes, and then you can see the steam coming out of the ground, and always amazed me at night. It could get down to 80 degrees and you'd be freezing. A little wind, and that rain comes, and then it's 80 degrees, and might as well be 0.
Okay. Now, how did your body hold up under those conditions with all the heat and the humidity and the rest of that?
Other than losing weight, pretty good.
Okay, so you didn't get any tropical diseases or infections or things like
Well,
that?
I come back with a skin parasite, but never given me any problems since.
Okay. Right. Now, while you were in Vietnam, did you get an R&R? Did you get to leave the country?
I could have, but I didn't. I didn't want to. I didn't want to do that parting again. So
you just chose to stay the whole time?
yeah.
Did you have any kind of in-country R&R or go off the base at all?
No, we patrolled just about every day.
All right. Now, did you have things like the USO or Red Cross people come through or come to your base?
Occasionally, yes. The big thing was Good Morning Vietnam, the radio
Mm-hmm.
firm that did a pretty good job on keeping you posted on what was going on in the States, which is what everybody wanted to know.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I mean, you're following, because a lot went on in the first half of 1968 back home as well.
Detroit was under siege, calling out the National
Mm-hmm.
Guards. Yeah.
I think some of that even in 67 too, because there were like 101st Airborne,
Yeah.
I think at the end of 67 is in Detroit for a while. That kind of, so there's that kind of stuff going on, and all of the politics at home. And the Martin Luther King assassination takes place while you're in Vietnam. Did that register at all where you were?
With a sense of sadness and loss that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as troubled as the times were, we didn't need this.
Mm-hmm.
He was a man that you had some hope that would help bring us together.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with Bobby Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, all right. Now, if you think back over it, so you spent a year in Vietnam, basically, kind of July to July, 67 to 68. Are there other particular incidents or impressions that kind of stand out in your memory from that?
war shouldn't be political. And provinces in Vietnam have a political structure, not as sophisticated as ours, but nevertheless real.
Mm-hmm.
We were on patrol with the Arvins, and we're coming into this village, maybe 150, 200 huts and buildings. You could sense that there was a problem. And instead of talking to the Americans, they're chattering amongst themselves, getting nervous. This American from the AmeriCal division had deserted his unit, come down the border, and was living with a girl. This part is assumption on mine that he ran out of money or sea rations or whatever he had. She was about to kick him out, and he killed her. So, about 35-year-old guy, big, muscular, nice looking. In a daze, 1,000-yard stare. And I said, he's sitting on the steps of this hooch. And so I said to one of the squatters, move these people back because they're starting to close in, the village people. And he just shook his head and said, sorry, wouldn't talk. So we got him airlifted out of there. And then the Arvins are saying the villagers are mad about this, that they wanted justice. I later heard, I suspect it's true, whether the amount is true, but our government paid this province, the head chieftain, a big sum of money for his province because this happened. Well, I wasn't happy that it happened. Don't know the details, but I doubt that was the right solution either.
Yeah. There was certainly a lot of payments got made for other kinds of damage to livestock, property, things. That was part of a system, but now you're paying for somebody's life, which is sort of a different thing. Okay. Did you have much interaction with Vietnamese civilians at all? I mean, aside from, say, the hooch mate or whatever, but did you, because you're out there in the field a lot.
Limited with civilians. Some of the local Arvins, we'd eat with them in their home, and the food was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Changed from sea rations.
Right.
Don't ask what you're eating. Just
Mm-hmm.
so.
Did you have a sense that any of the Arvins that you worked with had any real understanding of what was going on or why they were fighting?
You know, I think most of them viewed themselves as victims,
Mm-hmm.
caught up in an unnecessary.
Yeah.
Life had been pretty good. The French had quite a prosperous influence, and particularly the South. And once they left, the domino theory, I never had much faith in that. But we went into that part of the world without a clear vision, without an exit strategy,
Mm-hmm.
and reminiscent of some of our activities today. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. And so in a way, you're all in that kind of same boat. This is happening for reasons outside of your control, and
yeah,
you're just trying to get through it and get out the other end.
yeah.
Okay. All right. So as your tour kind of comes to a close, did you have an exact date to leave on, or did you just have to wait for someone to tell you when you got to go, or how did that work?
No, the company gives you a departure date,
Mm-hmm.
and went back up to Bien Hoa, got bumped by military rank or
Mm-hmm.
leaves the problems back home. Went down to Tonsanute and got a flight out of there, got into Oakland Army Base, or Travis Air Force Base, 2 o'clock in the morning. And they lost my luggage, thank you, with my, you know, I had gifts for family members, including my wife. So these Air Force buses pull up. And I said to this Air Force sergeant, I said, what's with the cages on the bus? He just laughed and said, you'll see. So we load onto the bus, and there were 4 or 5 of them. Start for Oakland Army Base. You have to go across the Oakland Bridge. You have to come down off the expressway through part of San Francisco. So by this time, it's 3:30 in the morning, still dark. And there are literally thousands of protesters there throwing everything they can at the bus. And even with police escorts and military bus, you're creeping through there. And I mean, inside those buses, it was like lions being tormented in cages. So I figured those bars were to keep us in the bus and not out. But special to come back home. And then had a 30-day leave, ended up at Fort Riley.
Okay. Now, when you went home on leave, did you go home in uniform, or did you change into civilian clothes?
No, uniform.
Okay. And did you have any actual trouble in the airports or anything like that, or was the protesters in the streets the only ones you saw?
Yeah. Now, the USO was very strong in the airports, and went to Fort Riley, ended up there, didn't even open a bank account. I could have extended for 30 days, 33 days in Vietnam, and got out 3 months early. Didn't want any part of that. Didn't know at the point I was going to Fort Riley, but it was all right. It was just a big, busy post. And we didn't open a checking account. You know, my wife worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken, And as soon as I told the new captain, the first day he's talking about re-upping and not a chance. You know, I could have been a military person, except, you know, in support of my wife, our life was taking a different path. But so I had a lot of range duty and charge of quarters, and they had charge of the security post, had a big prison there. And so that was interesting, and that's why I finished up. Got out of the Army just before Christmas. No one wanted to interview you. And then HR people would say, well, we're not certain you'll fit in.
What kinds of jobs were you looking for?
By that time, I could have gone back to the company I left in Ann Arbor, but I wanted the freedom of the road. So I was looking for sales, anything. And they had a lot of concern that you wouldn't fit back in the workforce. Until I went into a company, and the HR guy was retired Navy, and tool and die company. I didn't know a die from a sump pump, but I liked the vibration of the big presses. I liked the smell of the creosote floor, wood floors, the cutting fluids, the hydraulic oils, and the requirement was drive 90,000 miles a year all through the Midwest. I could do that, and so I got into the tool and die business.
Okay. And did you make a career in that area, or did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Became a defense contractor. Go to Washington yearly and see. The first time I walked in and to see the change of equipment. Awestruck. So.
All right. Did your wife go back to teaching, or did she?
She did. She taught at Calvin and then at Grand Valley.
Okay. So she's teaching college level then. So because she'd been doing middle school originally.
While we were in the Army. Yeah.
And so what field did she teach in?
English.
Okay. All right. So if you kind of look back at the time you spent in the service, what do you think you took out of that, or how did that affect you?
It made me a better person. It gave me a sense of pride and achievement, what it takes for America to be free. And I used to think, and being young and not too experienced, 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're going through these small villages, and these armored personnel carriers or light tanks, the tracks make a horrible sound in the middle of the night. What do these poor people think? And you could kick down their door if you wanted, if you thought you had a cause. I would declare that any mistakes made by military personnel in Vietnam were not intentional, but were out of fear or lack of experience. I think the training, while accelerated, at least when I went through, was pretty good. It was good enough to keep your head above water and stay out of trouble. So the Army, and particularly if you get overseas assignment, as like a college degree.
Mm-hmm.
So,
All right. Well, that makes for a good story. So thank you very much for coming in and sharing it today.
okay.
All right.
Thank you for asking. I enjoyed it.